Righty-ho, here is our 27th of October edition. And there are the links for previous presentations on YouTube and the slides in the archive, kindly put together by Simon. Email me for any links or slides that you want directly on that. And this edition, the general theme is celebration in pink, and you should know why it's in pink. A lot of new pieces to read, consultations, developments in the last week in the UK and London, and the weekly rolling slides. Okay, so first celebration. Thank you, everybody. We got this from Active Travel Academy. Special award in this year's Active Travel Media Awards, which are coordinated by the Active Travel Academy at the University of Westminster. Joint award is for the ideas webinars, Brian, and the news roundup within these webinars, Robert. We received a large number of nominations for both the webinars themselves and for the news roundup. So you can all applaud now, go like that. And I think this has implications for transport policy because we always talk about the carrot and stick. So I rang up a lot of people and or emailed them and said, do nominate us, which they did. So they'll have a nice warm feeling. That's the carrot. Also shows that I should be directing transport policy. And there's a little bit of stick in that Brian knows where you live. Okay, a second bit of something to be celebrating, Teo. Now, it's always important to differentiate between cycling as sport and cycling as transport. For those of you who don't know about cycling as sport, someone called Teo Goggenhardt won the Giro d'Italia, which is the second most important stage race in the world. And he is a boy who was brought up in Hackney. And actually he got into cycle sport through Cycling Club Hackney. It was a very good piece on ITV London News about him, which I'll come back to later in the presentation. But anyway, here he is winning the Giro d'Italia. And what he did, which was pointed out to me by Adam Tranter, is he retweeted this tweet from Adam Tranter talking about how good a low traffic neighborhood in Hackney is. Now, Teo Goggenhardt, I haven't looked it up, but he's got a hell of a lot more followers on Twitter than all of us here put together. And so if he's saying it's a good idea to have low traffic neighborhoods, whatever, in Hackney, that's very good. So celebration again, and it's in pink because the winner of the Giro d'Italia wears a pink jersey, La Maglia Rossa. Okay, here is the, we've had one of the two webinars produced by Road Danger Reduction Forum and Road Peace. Do go to that link. For the next webinar, we had 118 people attending last Thursday for that one. We've still got one on this Thursday, which is featuring Jeremy Leach on reducing speeds in your neighborhood, how to do that as a community. And then you have, again, a long chunk from Claire Rogers of London Cycling Campaign on how to get low traffic neighborhoods. Oh yeah, one other bit of celebration. Lucy Tausig Malstrand of Road Danger Reduction Forum is nominated for an award, an Active Travel Academy Award for a piece in Local Transport Today recently. So please do go to that link and get registered for this Thursday. And if you are registered, do remember to attend. Here's an interesting thing, a tweet from Chris Boardman, worth looking at as usual. And the thing there is they're actually talking about low traffic neighborhoods as calling them active neighborhoods because that's a kind of nicer name in a way. But look at his tweet and the video accompanying. Okay, now here is a very good thread from Councillor John Burke of Hackney, who you should follow. And what he's done is to look at the increase in motor traffic in urban areas. He's got a thread going through each London borough talking about this massive increase we referred to a few weeks ago associated with the use of route guidance systems like Waze, Google Maps, etc., saying that between 2009 and 2019, 10 years, number of miles driven on Barnett's roads increased by 200 million miles. And he's done a tweet for each borough. I haven't seen the Waltham Forest one, that would be interesting. But you've got something like about a 30% increase from about the time those route guidance devices were introduced. And that's why there's congestion in urban areas. Yeah, the Times, here's Carlton Reid, this is both ignorant and inflammatory of the Times to run such a inflammatory non-story with a headline like that. The headline was changed. The writer said it wasn't down to me. Yeah, it's not what I think, blah, blah. You should read the article. However, they've come up with another anti-cycling article today or a couple of days ago. I can't be bothered to read them anymore. And there's a dreadful one in the Daily Telegraphs about how cyclists shouldn't think they're morally superior. Although I think just about anybody is to someone who does that kind of inflammatory headline in a newspaper. Right, here was a letter from the Department for Transport with regard to making it easier to put in zebra crossings. We've talked about that at length here. And they end up saying the department has no plans to change their design, and that the trial in Manchester has been stopped because of COVID. Well, as Brian's tweeted, the trial's been started up again. We do hope that when it's finished, there will indeed be plans to make it easier to put in forms of zebra crossing of the type which we've discussed here at some length in the past. This is the Association of Police Chiefs, Police Commissioners and Association of Police Chief Constables. They did a survey, which a number of us filled in. Answer question 5, to what extent do you witness road traffic offences on the road where you live? And majority said daily, 21% weekly, occasionally 16%. So majority saying there's a problem here. And 66,000 people replying, but it's self-selected, obviously, and most of the people there are over 45, which is therefore not a good representative sample of people in Britain. Okay, here's a article called The Societal Costs and Benefits of Commuter Bicycling. And it's a modeling piece, and Phil Goodwin thought it was really excellent. And you get big BCRs, that's benefit cost ratios, showing that cycling is wonderful in terms of the benefits compared to the costs of installing cycling infrastructure. So this is a good piece of evidence to use and go to it. Brief thing by Roger Harrabin, BBC, on why you can't have technical fixes to sort out climate change and there needs to be less driving, quoting the wonderful Professor Gillian Lannable. It's a quick 2-minute guide to read through. Here is a piece in The Guardian, which was fronted by Peter Walker, and it refers to a YouGov survey commissioned by Greenpeace. And it says the nationwide polling carried out earlier this month found 26% of people strongly supporting LTNs, 31% would tend to. In contrast, 8% strongly opposed them, and about 8% tending to, and about a quarter who are neutral. So that's a piece of evidence you can use for LTNs being popular. There's your current guidance on how you should walk and cycle. Christian Walmart, short piece on LTNs in Labour, at least talking about it sort of tongue-in-cheek as the biggest transport controversy of the century. You know, get a life. Why are people so worried about the adverse effects of LTNs? Big report commissioned by the Transport Planning Society and written by the Smart Mobility Unit at University of Hertfordshire, which I've spoken at. One of the people involved, Stephen Joseph, used to run Transport 2000 campaign for better transport, and saying transport policies need to provide a clear route map to net zero by 2050, government target. Current systems of transport appraisal, forecasts, etc., do not reflect current realities and priorities, notably decarbonizing transport. And there's a lot more. And the London model of integrated transport and spatial planning is one that should be expanded to subnational transport bodies throughout Britain. So it's written in kind of transport plannerese, but it's you know, again, something you should refer to. Okay, yes, this is your last day if you haven't done it already. Do your consultation on the highway code. There are guides how to do it off the Cycling UK website, London Cycling Campaign website, and you know, read all the various things that have been said about it. Big disappointment, it hasn't revised the guidance on pedestrians and cyclists wearing high vis and cyclists wearing helmets. And you will have space in the consultation to make some comments about that. So if you haven't done your consultation already, and you should have done, then I've got some suggestions here saying that, you know, we're worried about the avoidance of responsibility by drivers in saying that cyclists should be wearing bright fluorescent clothing and cycle helmets, and that pedestrians should have to wear special reflective clothing. And here is suggested rewording for rules 59 and rule 3. And instead of just sort of blowing a gasket, just say may consider instead of should. Because, you know, that kind of wording doesn't embarrass the Department for Transport too much, but it means that you don't have to wear a helmet or high vis. Diversity pledge, nothing new. Last week's talk, so it's still 70% male and 30% female on this webinar. The delay slide is now, oh, and it's now 7 months since lockdown. Sorry, I haven't changed that. And there's Alex's tweet. 80% of the government's announced £225 million for walking and cycling is still just a number and an announcement. So when exactly is the Department for Transport going to allocate the remaining £180 million of emergency active travel fund? It was supposed to be early September, and this is now the 8th time for Alex's tweet. And there was a rumor that it would not be announced until the comprehensive spending review is announced, which would be in another month, 6 weeks time. So this is really dragging on. However, and I've got the pink of celebration here, there is something called get paddling being whispered about. I don't know what it is. It may be ATF tranche 2, but I'm probably being too optimistic. Roger told me to be less optimistic last week, so I'll have to be happy to be unhappy. Okay, here's on the ground in the UK. It all depends where you live. And this is West Sussex from Mark Treasure. This is their comment about how they want to take things out. Social distancing meant that more space was needed for walking and cycling to reduce pressure on public transport and to help people to return to work and school. However, since that time, schools have returned and the pop-up cycle lanes are no longer needed for this purpose. Now, what kind of logic is that? I mean, read your way through it a few times and your brain will melt because it makes no sense whatsoever. That's West Sussex. Okay, Surrey, this is from Jitendra Oni. This is before and after. And you can see little thingies there. That is not what is specified in local traffic note 120. That is stupid. And if that is being done with emergency active travel funding, that is wrong. As is this in Stockport. EATF funding used to paint repeated cycle logos along Tatton Road north and south as part of Heaton Chapel to Stockport route. Having said that, I think there is something I read about Stockport doing beelines, so maybe they're doing something good somewhere, but that's that. Okay, London, we've got the negotiations over the funding of Transport for London, and they've got just about a week to go before we have to decide whether there'll be cuts of free transport for children and OAPs, extension of the congestion charge, fare increases, or council tax increases. I've pointed out that I would think that a congestion charge should extend throughout all of London and probably not at the high £15. Ideally, we want smart road user charging, but that will take ages to bring in. In London, yeah, the council voted to keep LTNs in. That's very good. But there's still vandalism. Someone's saying that some discussion about how this bollard holder had been cemented in such a way that this is sticking up and cyclist pedestrians get hit by it. Still a lot of nasty stuff happening. Now, Hackney, good thread there about all the organizations that you can get involved with in Hackney to help you start cycling, but no mention of Cycling Club Hackney, that should be, sorry. Do take a look at that thread, that tweet yesterday, which shows you the ITV London news item, which is very good. Because we do want to talk about Teo Guggenhardt to get some kids into riding bikes. And we're thinking of having some kind of celebratory bike ride from Condor Cycles round Regent's Park, where you used to train, up to Hackney Town Hall. Yeah, now here's the celebration. It's a thread on Twitter from Councillor Andy Hull, which I've reproduced because it's really how to address residents' concerns. And I've highlighted some bits in red. And it starts off saying, you know, we're about to become an LTN and it'll be nicer. Then he says, he refers to the Islington Labour manifesto, which said, we see the need to close certain roads. So when people say, oh, we had no notice, he said, you elected us. Islington has got all its councillors, bar one being Labour, and the one who isn't is Green Party. So everybody who has voted in is supportive of it. They were different from people like Lambeth and Hackney, who got involved right from the beginning. They did more consultation. They did an online consultation, most people agreeing, and they say that they'll ask for resident feedback after 12 months. Then they point out less than a third of Islington households have access to a car, points out that air pollution levels are high, points out that the fines will go on transport and highways in Islington. And he says, yeah, there will be some displacement of traffic onto main roads, but the evidence shows it'll evaporate to some extent. And they've done a resident impact assessment, taking the needs of disabled residents into account. So when you get the what about disabled people, he's got an answer. And the final tweets are saying there'll be a lot of economic benefits, including to small businesses. The approach we're taking is supported by Transport for London and the Department for Transport nationally. And he ends up saying, I live, work, represent Highbury, and walk the breadth of Highbury West twice daily with an asthmatic toddler. Time for change. And it's a splendid thread, and it's what you can actually put out if you're a councillor to get people to support your LTN. And so here's your campaigns and reading, and your there they are. I need to update some of this. And the consultations, still the hit and run petition, do that. Last day up to midnight for highway code review. Do please put in those comments about high vis and helmets. And the government consultation on planning for the future finishes, I think, on Thursday. Don't forget to attend our webinar on Thursday if you're not already signed up for it. Here is the letter which we talked about last week, which we should have some concern about in terms of its tone, although the official guidance to local authorities still says as it always was. Some adverts, bit of amendment there. That's one in Bristol. And anybody who's got any more examples of subvertising, which I haven't shown, do send them in. And finally, from the Bike is Best campaign, there's a nice positive celebratory thing. So that's it.
Can we make Kerb sexy again? I don't think that was in any doubt, but here's some sticky curb action with a nice mock-up of perhaps what a design guide should look like. So in my blog, I've now up to 416 posts, over 700,000 views, and by far the most popular by a huge amount remains Curb Your Enthusiasm. So I think people are actually quite interested in curbs, believe it or not. It's not new. Here's some curbs which are 2,000 years old in Pompeii in Italy. Not the only place to have invented and used curbs. Maybe the raised walkways in the Wild West. Curbs keeping people away from the filth in Georgia and London. Plenty of them around. And yes, no need to look so worried. They've been with us for a long time. So here's some obvious stuff that curbs do. Retaining the edge of the top layers of a pavement, with pavement being the road construction. Demarcation of different areas or uses of a highway. Diverting or controlling surface water. And restraint, as you can see here, preventing vehicles leaving the carriageway. Old cast iron bridge parapet you can just about see over there on the left. And this containment curb used here to stop vehicles crashing through it. Perhaps a bit more subtly, we've got curbs being used at pedestrian crossing points, being used as wayfinding by visually impaired people, making buses accessible and creating protected cycle tracks, as I would imagine people on this call know. And here's a photo from the East-West Cycleway in central London, and just casually somebody using the curb as a footrest. It was never designed for that, but it's just how people behave. So our curb spotters guide sees us with 4 main curb types, as you can see on the right there. Lots and lots of curb you see out in the street are just basic grey concrete, formed by liquid cement and aggregate in a pressure mould. Standard dimensions, there's British standards for all of that, which is 914 millimetres long, which must be some sort of imperial measurement we've all forgotten. There's internal and external radius variants of whole or part curb, or whole or part meterage radiuses, from fairly small up to, I think, about 10, 11 metres is the largest, and 12 metres and larger, you can just form the curves. Transition curbs there in the pink, that takes us from your normal type of curb to a different type of curb. So here's like a driveway treatment, a full height curb, dropping down to a drop curb for a driveway. And we also have cheeses, which you might spot in just a minute. There's a proper name for them, and it's quadrants. They come in the standard profiles, a couple of different sizes, useful for traffic islands, and also well used for, in this kind of example here, you've got a quadrant curb there and a quadrant curb there, just helping to form a slope down to a crossing point. I know it's not red for the safety auditors on the call, I've seen 2 of you, not my scheme. What type of materials? Well, there's all sorts out there. So here's some natural stone granite at the top, a bit of a pink granite going on there. Conservation curbs, which are a stone looking curb made from recycled quarry risings and concrete, which is that flecked material there. We have composite curbs, which are resin and quarry dust. There's our cheeses again, which is a really nice example of a granitic concrete curb. So that's a curb with a high granite chippings component, exposed aggregate, kind of makes a nice finish. This is probably from the 1930s, so very robust. Being used here just to form the front of a vehicle crossing, so the footway itself is kept nice and level. That's a cast iron curb from Bristol, but you see slate and any materials locally, any local stone all over the country. Plastic, and some bolt down rubber action here, from some photos I took yesterday over in Enfield. These are quite nice. These are actually solid recycled car tyres, incredibly heavy, bolted down to the road. There's like a chamfered profile on that one, separating the parking bays. There's some other lumps with wands here, demarcating cycle lanes. For buses, we've got a couple of different ways of doing it. So the 2 main photos there are castle curbs. This photo here is obviously Brighton and Hove. This is the Lewis Road scheme. And the idea here is that you've got a curb which is rather high to match in with the low floor of a bus to try and make it as level as possible. What we found over here in London is, because our low floor buses have been very low for a long time and have got lower, actually the castle curb themselves are probably a bit high in some circumstances. So TfL talk about a curb height of 125 to 140 millimetres. That's the height along the front there. For directing water, a couple of different types of channels here. So here's a square channel. That's usually used when the road is really, really flat and you're trying to very, very accurately send the water one way or the other. Far more accurate than you would do with a surfacing machine. And here we have a dish channel. Again, it's designed just to collect the water and fire it somewhere else. This example is actually in a footway. It's not a material to use in a footway because of the dish. It can create a tripping hazard for people to break their ankles on. And here's a couple of 2-for-1 offers here. The large unit there is known as a beanie block. That's by Marshalls. Surfaced up to the level of these holes. There's a big hollow base to these. Access chambers and all sorts of things going on there. And this curb unit here is the Acco curb drain. That's a composite curb, so that's resin and sort of crushed, very fine dust and aggregate. Pretty strong, but again, the water goes in the hole and it runs alongside the channel. So the key components, Upstand is the height of the curb above the road or the other surface. Face is the front of curb, but lots of people talk about a curb face height, meaning upstand and vice versa. The gap between the curbs is known as a joint, which is either very small, perhaps a trail's width, or it's mortared if it's natural stone in some circumstances. And our friend Finbar laughing at the butt, obviously. So here's a basic diagram of curb installation. Curb there sitting on a bed, which is the bit that goes underneath, and the backing, which sits behind it, which is kind of a dry, weaker concrete than you'd normally use for structural purposes. Best laid on operation if you can, just keeps it nice and strong. Important to see that the actual curb and its bed and backing are laid on decent material, known as a sub base. And above that is your asphalt layers or your block paving or your concrete road or whatever. So here's some work in action. So you can see this whole width through the road and out to this end. That's all improved ground, that's all sub base. You see the curb line being laid there, there's one just here, and there's another one just on the edge there. All of that assembly of curbs with a bed and backing is on that decent ground, on that decent sub base. So everything has to start off from a decent position. And as you can see here is an example of where a decent foundation has not been provided. Quite often with a retrofit, that was a path that was widened. And what's happened here is that you've got this edging curb just here. It's got concrete bed and backing, but there's no sub base underneath it, nothing at all to support that curb and concrete there. So what's happened is where that red line is there, that's just cracked and it's fallen away. So we need to support our curbs. Here's the heavy mob. This was a scheme retrofitting a cycle track. And what we were doing here is taking an existing cycle lane, which you can just see on the bottom photo. So the cycle lane was here. There was a concrete strip not being used for anything, so we rebuilt the whole thing for a cycle track. That's a serious piece of kit to bring in to dig the trench, but that's a really well-built road, so we could lay the curb straight on top of the old road surface underneath. You have to be very careful with those with gas services and electric services if they're a bit shallow though. So it's quite important to go and check out what's there first. So, talk about curbs and walking. So if there's no interaction with traffic, are curbs needed at all? There's Covent Garden. In fact, you can probably see some curbs. There's just a hint of a curb there. There's a hint of a curb line there. Not doing any sort of traffic job. May have been a nod to the past when this was open to horses and carts or whatever. You quite often find the old curbs left as a reminder of the street or sometimes direct water. But in terms of protection from traffic, it's no longer doing that sort of job. So in some cases, a curb is a product of having motor traffic around. But if we are using curbs, then we need to realise that people need to cross the road. So on the one hand, for people who move with wheels, using wheelchairs, mobility scooters, pushing buggies or whatever, we need flush curbs. But on the other hand, if we're having flush curbs, we need tactile paving for visually impaired people to locate the edge of the footway. Quite often, as you see in the left-hand photo, the curbs are left too high to try and divert the water. This is probably down to poor design, really, because if you're going to have a problem with water, you need to deal with that with some gullies upstream of the problem. So if that's not flush, that's possibly high enough that will catch some smaller wheels. So if someone's using a wheelchair with very small front wheels, that could tip them out the front, especially if they're being pushed. A bit of annoyance for somebody pushing a buggy. So that's, as you'll see in that photo, the curb there actually, so that's the bull-nose curb, often used to drop curbs. In this photo, we've turned it upside down, so it's absolutely flat. And sometimes I think, do we get ourselves a bit tied up in knots? So what we have here in this diagram, which is probably a bit hard to see, is some sort of interim guidance that DFT brought out on tactile paving with level surfaces. So the idea was going to be that anywhere you have a level surface, there's tactile paving in lieu of any detectable curb height. It's a bit simpler than the existing guidance. It merely says that once you find the tactile paving, and it didn't really specify, possibly blister, you're entering a level surface.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello? Am I still here, Simon?
Yes, you are. Rob,
You are. Someone needs to
mute
mute.
yourself briefly. You're fine. Carry on.
Right, okay, I'll crack on. Yeah, so do we get ourselves tied up in knots? So in this big photo here, what we've tried to do is have tactile crossing in 2 directions, and we've tried to keep the curb height up between the drop curbs. It's still a pretty low curb face, which may be difficult for some people. In this photo, which I think was on Westminster Bridge, there's an area of flush curb there next to the tactile crossing for the mini zebra, and the designers use a bit of tactile paving there, which is probably over the top, to be honest. So trying to follow some principles here, are we getting ourselves a bit tied up in knots? So on that, RNIB would like at least a 60mm upstand, but that may not be enough for some users. RNIB have also said that only 125mm high curbs is the only unequivocal way of installing the necessary adjustment for blind and partially sighted pedestrians. Now, 125mm is actually quite a step. It's probably higher than the vast majority of curb heights all over the place, especially in sort of historic areas. It's a tricky one, really, because somewhere like Francis Road in Waltham Forest, pedestrianised during the day, if that had 125mm high curb faces, that would then create an issue for people trying to just walk across the road there, between the shops. Anybody using wheels trying to cross over would have some problems. It's probably one of the most tricky issues we've got, and we can't really get consensus from everybody at the moment. There was a study done in 2009 which looked at this, and this showed that 60mm had everybody detecting it, a range of visually impaired users, some working with guide dogs. Most people detected 50mm, but not everybody. Although this was in a lab, so it's under controlled conditions and may not be representative of what happens out on the street. This is probably one big area that needs some proper live street trials and proper feedback, because otherwise everybody just goes on and does what they think is best. Example from Cardiff Bay here, where they've used a curb and a channel. That piece there is flush all the way through, but either side there is a step. You can see that in the shadow there. If you can't easily tell the difference between the colours of that curve and that channel, that's a big old risk there. That's ankle breaking territory. Even if somebody actually assumes there's a step and there's not a step. So that's something to watch out for. So curb and cycling, again, if there's no interaction with traffic, are curbs needed? So if you're well away from traffic, what are curbs actually doing? So as I see it with this, there's 3 states of protection. Carriageway level cycle track, so you've got a curb which sticks up on both sides, essentially, full height. There's an intermediate level, or steps. So you've got the road at one level, cycle track at the next level, footway at the 3rd level, stepping up every time. And there's the footway level. This is obviously CS3 out in along the A13. Footway level, so you've got this demarcation block which is designed for long cane users to tap against. That also spawns tactile paving every so often, and actually they've got that wrong. It's the wrong type there for people like me that worry about such things. It does a good job there, probably because people are walking generally straight lines. They're not encountering having to cross, but it can be a bit of a lazy way of doing it sometimes. Doc's Manhattan there probably would rather just keep completely away from traffic, blue cycle tracks or not. So for curbs be forgiving for cyclists, So anything 50 millimeters or lower works well. So we've immediately got this conflict with trying to get a 60 millimeter height for visually impaired people. And you can see at the top there, that's significantly higher than 50 millimeters. That's pedal catching territory. If you have an upstand, as you can see on this middle photo, if you're trying to cross that at any sort of angle like this, in line with the curb, it's going to grab your wheel and throw you off the bike. And then we have sloping curbs in the third photo. So on the whole, you can bounce up and down those all day long. They're great for disabled cyclists who want to transition from the cycle track to the footway to park or get into a shop or whatever. If you can't dismount, it's absolutely perfect. But if we are going to cross a curb, make it perpendicular to the line of travel. And in many cases, let's not have a curb at all. Let's have asphalt to asphalt. So here's two images. The one on the left is in Amsterdam, through a large pedestrian plaza. And on the right is Leicester, big shared plaza there. You can just see in the sign, there's actually two-way cycling going on. It's pedestrianised most of the time, but there's some deliveries out of hours. So to curb or not to curb, and that's the same as looking at separation or integration. And that goes back to the network level. So in the Amsterdam version, this is quite a busy cycleway. There are curbs provided to give some proper demarcation, proper understanding that it's a different type of use there by cycles. Leicester has got a half decent network around the outside. So actually a lot of people cycling in the town centre or the city centre have business there. So there's less of an issue of people blasting through perhaps. So curb separating the modes where the cycles are through traffic, that's probably something to consider. This photo is from Deventer in the Netherlands, really showing the classic Dutch way of doing it. So there's a 30-degree sloped curb there, very forgiving to bounce up and down. Gives a height difference between the cycle track and the footway. And this is all about forgiveness for people cycling versus detectability for visually impaired people versus access for disabled cyclists. And as I've said, I don't think there's a universal answer. There isn't a magic curb. A lot of stuff is down to context, consultation, and in many cases, a lot of it is about opinion. Can curbs, and this is using cycle tracks as an example, could using curbs make it harder for people to cross the street? CS2 in Whitechapel, if you're crossing the street here, you're trying to fight through the busy traffic, then you've got to step over this curb, then step up another curb. Again, context here probably is where you've got lots of extra signalised crossings, maybe less of an issue, but certainly people wanting to nip across here and there may find that more difficult. So into some creativity, some cheeky suds action here going on. That first photo at the top is from the Westway, or just next to the Westway, and the bottom photo is up in Enfield. And really this is just curb lines with cuts in them. Lets the drainage go into these rain gardens for flood management. So SUDS, sustainable drainage systems, if anybody was wondering. And we've got some examples of continuous footways here. This one's Walton on the Maze. Very low curb height at the road edge on both sides, but it's a continuous footway, tactile paving, which is probably well ahead of its time. Does a good job there. Then the other photograph is somebody you might recognise doing the Gummer test for those old enough. The height difference and the use of curbs there just reinforcing the priority for cycling. Better than bollards, that comes from the idea in some situations actually putting a stepped curb, two curbs back to back, maybe stop people driving over greens or areas that you don't want vehicles in. And we're getting there now. So here's some innovation. Can we go Dutch? This is probably what some people have been waiting for. Yes, we can. So with two types of curb that the Dutch have got that we now have, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the first word. Second word, inritbanden. So cycle track curb on the left and entrance curb on the right. The first is actually from Bristol. So this is a 30 degree, 50 millimeter high, kind of perfect Dutch cycle track curb. The one on the right is actually Amsterdam, and it's just about to be installed in Coventry. So Bristol won the race for the cycle track curb, and Coventry is actually going to beat Salford, I think, at final analysis. And we'll have these curbs in the UK. And the beauty of these is that we can raise drivers over the footway of the cycle track rather than dipping people walking and cycling down into the road and out again. So it kind of reverses and reinforces that priority there. So there is a real Joy of Kerbs. It's probably not as saucy as the first one you saw. That's on my website. You can download it for free. Once the access curbs are laid in Coventry and I've been out to see them, I'll give it an update because it's a little bit out of date from that regard. And we're now into some KerbNerd questions. And that is me measuring the height of curbs in Leicester. Thank you very much.
Great stuff, Mark. Thanks for that. Has anyone got any questions? Dave's got his hand up. I'm hearing someone else. Tim, you've unmuted. You're going all over the place. So I'll try and look out for the hands up and work out where I can see that. David Cox in Birmingham, do you want to go first? I've seen your... No, that was a cheering it on. Dave Halliday, Glasgow, you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, some thoughts from Mark on one of the problems we have is drivers driving on footways, and you know, we're probably 40 to 60 deaths per year where motor vehicles make excursions from the carriageway. You showed the containment curbs, that they are obviously totally over the top for most situations. Is there any way that we can get curbs that stop motor vehicles taking excursions from the carriageway?
Well, I guess in short, yeah, if you had something perhaps 200, 250 millimeters high or a double curb, absolutely you can do that. But then you make it really, really difficult for people to step up and down them. That's the balance. So is it somewhere that you absolutely have to protect because it's like a bridge parapet where you can have catastrophic failure? But if we're going to protect pedestrians everywhere, then you have high curbs absolutely everywhere. And every time you have a drop curb, that's your incursion point. So I'm not entirely sure that's going to be practical, Dave, is it?
Well, I'm just wondering if there's a design we might be able to do in curb that could be between 4 and 6 inches high, but have an undercut on it, so that if you try and mount it with an average car tyre, you'll rip the tyre off. And it would tend to contain
a nice lumpy, a nice lumpy granite curb will probably do that job. A nice square edge top would probably destroy the tyre.
And another couple, very nice to see your cast iron curbs, because they survive for years until somebody takes them out. And I mean, why don't we go back to cast iron? And the other couple of things, your side gullies, self-clearing gullies. I've got some fantastic streets up here laid 160 years ago with sets, and to see the way that the water just runs to the side and focuses in that gully to go down and clear it with all the debris. I think that's something that's not really understood by some people who lay out highways. And the upstands, I'm a bit of an upstand nerd on account of level crossings and tram lines. And I think it's 6 millimeters is the trip hazard and sufficient to knock a bike wheel out of context.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
it doesn't take much at all.
And 3 millimeters for steel work. And I've noticed in Hackney on the A10, there are some particularly nice manhole frames where they've got a line of blocks around the frame, which can move with the tarmac, and then you don't get the tarmac sinking away from the steel work. Any thoughts on, you know, tarmac sinking away from solid stuff like curbs and steel?
I've done it the other way around. So block paving around my ironwork with some asphalt to stop the blocks moving. Everyone tries it. There's lots of products out there. A lot of it is just down to the quality control of the work going in the first place. I think one of the big problems with that is if you're trying to surface, well, you raise ironwork first, then surface, and don't get it quite right. I think you're probably better off doing the surfacing and getting the ironwork right second. It's just more practical.
Thank you.
Ruth had a question. Ruth Chiswick.
Thanks, Mark. RNIB was mentioned about something to do with heights and everything, about when it's level. I spend a lot of time in Holland and in Delft, say, all the areas where it's shared use for walking and cycling, not cars, obviously, there are no curbs. And I just wondered, do they have the same question? Because according to my partner, they don't even discuss it. So I just wondered, with your knowledge, do you know, do they have a similar organisation like the RNIB there that we have here who object to quite a lot?
It's a tricky question. I mean, only what I've read and heard people on social media. So you do get the same controversy here and there. It's a different country. It's spent 20, 30 years getting to where it is now. We're playing massive catch up. So yeah, potentially we may need to do things to make people feel more comfortable for a while before we get to that level. No pun intended. I mean, the example I gave from Amsterdam, which was a cycle track running through a pedestrian plaza, the designers there obviously thought you needed some sort of height difference. Of course, the problem, as soon as you have a height difference, it then becomes difficult for everybody to cross, say, wheelchair users, mobility scooter users. So having it completely flat, but people knowing where they should be is one thing. But if you can't feel where you should be, that's another. So I think this is just going to rage and rage. And schemes will keep going in, and people will get stuff right, some people get stuff wrong. So I don't think there is a universal answer.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yes, interesting stuff on curbs. We have a problem in the UK with block paving failing at the edges, and in Holland they have like a little triangle, which if you're doing herringbone block paving, it sort of neatens the job up and makes everything much tighter. So I've seen some in Rotherham and in Doncaster, and there's some in Gateshead, but it's usually you just get terrible cuts on the edge of herringbone and it just fails. So have you got any advice on that sort of detail on your site?
Yeah, Bishop's hat is the special that you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to use it, and I've got no idea what the actual width would be, I'd have to go and calculate it, but if you're going to use it, you have to have the area paving, well, I've raised my hands up so you can see, you have to have the area paved spot on,
yeah,
because then the units won't fit in properly. So I've seen them used here and there. The big problem in the UK is that we use block paving in streets where we shouldn't use block paving. So streets where you've got buses, heavy vehicles. Netherlands, they tend to use block paving where it's lightly trafficked. I think that's the main difference.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's lightly trafficked and built properly, so 45 degrees with herringbone is the way forward with traffic. 80mm blocks, which are a bit heftier, which should be used for trafficked areas, but not in areas with heavy traffic. But they will fail every single time. So the Dutch don't do anything better than us in terms of quality. They use it in the right place.
Thank you.
We seem to be fairly well behaved, so people just want to dive in at the moment.
I'll dive in. Hi, Ranty. It's Roxanne here from Cambridge. Hi. So playing the foreigner card here, myself and my other friends from abroad are completely puzzled and bewildered by UK pavements that wobble up and down at every driveway, and I've just never seen anything like it anywhere else in the world. And I don't know, are there any benefits or any reasons for having it like that? Why is it like that? And is there any sort of movement to make that impossible? It's just bizarre, even on brand new infrastructure. What are your thoughts?
It's completely lazy in terms of how it's been designed and detailed. So you've got standard curb units, so you've got a full height curb, you've got a ramp curb, and then the drop curb. And all the people do is they take the level from the back of the footway to the front, and then you find the thing tipping every single time. You don't need to do that, but people just don't take the care and attention to get that right. The way around it, there's two good ways around it. The first is using those quadrant curves that I call cheeses. So you only drop the very, very first part of the footway and leave the back of it completely flat, or use new access curbs, because you get your ramp at the front from the access curb and the back stays flat. But you can detail it with ordinary curbs. It's just, yeah, it's laziness.
Right. So
I've got a blog on that somewhere.
Oh, do please. I'd love a link to that. But is there nothing, there's no standards or guidelines that make that the wrong thing to do? It is just laziness, and they can go over
here
it.
will be down to, I mean, there's guidance which talks about that, but most local authorities are left to their own devices. And I think this is a big problem. People, you know, we laugh about KerbNerdery and the rest of it, but actually this is nuts and bolts stuff which makes things work or not work. I don't know the answer. Perhaps we need a big campaign with local authorities to go and work out what best practice is and follow it.
Yeah, it just astounds me. It's not even best practice. It's just standard how you do things in other countries. But of course, here they just managed to find a way to make it.
I mean, you go back in this country probably 50, 60 years, we got it right all the time. Older states tend to have got it right, but we've forgotten about it. I'll put a link to the, I've just found it, I'll put it in the blog, in the chat rather.
Thank you. I'll send it on to some people.
Can I continue on foreigner questions?
Over it.
Hi, so I'm Renee. I'm from Denmark. I'm just wondering if, yeah, so usually in Denmark, or in many occasions anyway, there would be a curb and then there's kind of an asphalt lip on the outside that functions as the ramp. I've pretty much not seen that anywhere in the UK. Is that just because it's not allowed, or?
Well, I'll call it the Danish bodge.
Yeah.
There's a video of me somewhere nearly coming off my bike in Copenhagen trying to use one of those, where it wasn't quite right. So, yeah, if you saw that in the UK, we'd assume that was a piece of temporary work. So, yeah, I mean, it's quite, I suppose the Danish approach is fairly practical and straightforward and run stuff along the road really, really quickly. But it does let itself with that, because a lot of those little pieces of asphalt, I'd call it a fillet, F-I-L-L-E-T. A lot of them are really, really steep. So as you hit them with anything with wheels, there's quite a jolt. It'll be difficult for some people, perhaps using wheelchairs, maybe to get up them, or mobility scooters. So if it's a proper crossing point or somewhere where a cycle's going over, I'd rather see a smooth transition. But yeah, I've got a few photos of those.
Can I continue? I put a question in the chat before, but it's a very long chat. So I asked about the entrance curb that you mentioned, if there's any like minimum or maximum incline on them, because what I see here is that a lot of ramps tend to be very flat, and I've had a discussion like in terms of continuous footways here in the UK. A lot of ramps tend to be very flat, and while there are problems with the bump that you get on the Danish ramps, they're quite steep, but that means that cars also get that bump, and that means that they slow down if you do have the continuous footway. And we've had some discussions, yeah, where we're about, can we kind of designate not only a minimum, but, well, not only a maximum, but also a minimum incline? Mm-hmm. Is there any examples of guidance like that or good practice?
I can't remember the ramp on the entrance blocks. I think it's about 1 in 10 from memory. I think the Dutch Crow manual talks about around about a 1 in 9 slope. That kind of stuff I'd have to go and look up though. I don't hold it all in my head. But I mean, certainly here, if you've got something that somebody who perhaps uses a wheelchair or a mobility scooter or pushes a pushchair is using as a pedestrian ramp or whatever, when really 1 in 12 is meant to be the steepest, 1 in 20 is preferred. And that's fairly similar to how we do a speed hump in the UK. So it's there or thereabouts. Probably a little bit steeper over a short distance is probably acceptable too, perhaps 1 in 9, 1 in 10, that's probably okay. But it's very context based.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I've been trying to promote is that the ramp for, well, scooters or buggies should be, well, very flat, but that for cars you want to have it fairly steep to ensure that it's not flush.
Yeah.
But
I mean, so far with
that through yet.
I mean, we've got the one manufacturer making these blocks, and they're to a standard set of dimensions, so they don't do different ramp steepness yet. So I guess we'll find out in Coventry how they work.
Mark, can I just ask about the splayed and battered curves and so on? We've got a lot of stuff going in Greater Manchester now, which has lots of different curves all over the place. Some of them are Cyclops junctions, but other junctions as well, which look nice, but we don't seem to be seeing many splayed curbs in those setups. Is there an issue with getting splayed curbs with various curvatures?
I mean, the only standard splay curve in the UK is the 45-degree splay, and you can get those in fairly tight radii. You can get quadrant curves with that profile, but 45 degrees is still a bit steep to be forgiving. So 45 degrees laid fairly low is kind of okay from a pedal strike point of view, but not necessarily from going up and down, because you still get this tram lining issue. The 45-degree splay curve, the actual bit above, how to explain it, the bit where it goes back on itself, that's 75mm high. So that's still in pedal strike territory. So before Charcon produced their curve they used in Bristol, I've seen people use curbs, so standard, well, it's a half batter profile, but laid on its back. So Leicester used that. But that's only about a 35mm upstand. So that's probably not high enough to be detectable. This is the whole issue we've got. So we don't have any standard pallets in this country yet. So the Charcon is the first 30-degree curve, but I don't think they make lots of radius curves for that yet. So with what I've seen going into the Cyclops, for example, there's lots of very fiddly corners and island sizes, and you just wouldn't do that with anything else. You have to use the standard curves to make that work. The problem with standard curves, as soon as you have any height, you're losing perhaps 200, 250mm of usable space, but it gets stuff built now. So where does the balance lie? It's a tricky one, yeah.
Hey, my local authority have got a planning application in at the moment for some works doing at a junction that includes a shared footway still. But the cycle access to it is crossing over a flush curb round a left-hand bend. So I'm thinking it's going to be slippery. Is there any reason, like structurally, that they have to actually have a curb in there? Or can they just take that flush curb out altogether?
I mean, in theory, you can just surface asphalt to asphalt in that situation. That's what I'd prefer to do. So there's a classic thing where you've got, say, a cycle lane going to a cycle track, and you're going along and you're kind of just switching over. So as you say, that's the perfect situation for either a slight lip or a bit of ice forming. So yeah, asphalt to asphalt in that situation, you can do it. There's no real structural reason for it. Not if it's a transition point, you know, it's flush.
Sorry, Mark, it's Shane Foran. Just come in on the RNIB issue, because this is going to be a big row, as you've pointed out, and Ruth has alluded to it. I have it in the back of my head that under Dutch traffic law, if you have a white cane, that confers a specific duty of care on drivers. That maybe there's a difference in the traffic environment that we're not quite picking up when we're trying to assess the attitude of visually disabled people to how these structures work in practice. And I'm wondering, is it that visually disabled Dutch people get better treatment from drivers generally, such that they're not terrified of crossing a curb that they can't see, or something like that? I haven't got this well developed. It's just something that Bob said and then you said, and it triggered something in the back of my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I can't answer it, so I don't know is the answer. I mean, my vague perception is I'm not entirely sure that Dutch drivers are any better than UK drivers. I'm not sure that Danish drivers are any better than Dutch drivers or anything like that. A lot of it, I think, has to go to the environment. So if you're used to walking around a fairly low traffic situation, as you might find in lots of Dutch towns, that's probably a lot different to a comparable situation in UK and Ireland. So We've got some towns which, if they were Dutch, actually there are very few cars going past. Drivers feel more like guests. The experience might be a bit different on main roads where you've got signals or something like that. That's probably as much as I can answer on that one, I think.
Hello. Mine is anecdotal, but I spend a lot of time there because my partner lives west of Rotterdam. Dutch driving is different, especially in rural roads, residential roads, streets, everything. They've had 30k, 80-mile-an-hour speed limits for a long time. Even if you walk towards the corner of a road, someone will stop for you. Whereas here, they just make you wait as they drive through. As you say, on main roads, it's very different, but then the way the traffic light system works, it's incredibly good. They have this clock ticking system, which is fantastic if you've got hearing, or if you can see you're deaf, then you can see the dots going round, and the dots get quicker as the time goes. So there is a lot more, but I think the driving is incredibly different than our experience here. And if you're in a one-way street with cars parked on both sides and you're crossing, a driver will stop. They don't, make you wait for the car to have gone. So I think it's a behavioural thing. That's my bit.
Hey, a quick query on TRIFs. I know we see a lot of designers saying they're putting TRIF curbs into stopped vehicles leaving the road, but the TRL studies of Paul F., who won't name his surname because he will get shot, that even at quite shallow angles and moderate speeds, their test vehicles got airborne when they hit TRIF curbs. And in the same way that the cycle issue, the helmet issue is a very complex mix of physics, biology, human behavior, driver adaptation in response to their perception of risk and so on. Are you aware of anything that's been done around the behavioural perception of curb heights? My instinct is that in some ways, the lower the curbs are, the more a bit like removing guardrail, it makes drivers more cognizant of the fact it's not quite such a sort of dividing line. Has anyone actually researched that?
I'm not sure. I've not read anything. I get the logic. I'll probably go back to an anecdote. There's one of the mainline railways I know reasonably well. There was a piece of work being done about vehicle incursion. So this was after the Great Heck. Was it the Great Heck, which was the incursion one? Whichever one it was. And so they were going around assessing all the potential places that vehicles could get onto the track accidentally or whatever. And this particular location, it was a shallow angle, road ends in a bit of a bend, and it runs parallel with the main line. And they had lots of problems of people just not going around the bend and straight into the railway land. I'm not sure anybody got quite as far as the track, so there's a bit of a gap there. So they put in TRIF curbs to try and mitigate. And as you say, people carried on with the behaviour, they kept launching themselves, but now the TRIFs just launched them a little bit higher. And I think in one case, I think it was a van from memory, got very, very close. This is the mainline track. So I was on site with a meeting. It was just the actual place where people left the road was just across the borough boundary, which was interesting. And my suggestion was plant a massive field of willows there to try and catch energy of the vehicles leaving. And I was just stared at, really. But that's not going to contain a vehicle. That's the problem. So I don't know. I mean, maybe if you've got everywhere protected by TRIFs and it all looks very high as a driver, you think, this is mine. This is a racetrack. I don't need to worry. Be interested if people in Cardiff have got a view on that, because there's loads of places in Cardiff with.
That's just what I was going to say. Cardiff is full of TRIF, isn't it? It's everywhere. And also, if you Google overturned car in Cardiff, you'll find lots of the locations which are TRIF.
Yeah. So I think it's a good question. I don't know the answer. Just gave me an excuse for an anecdote, really.
See if we can get Road Safety Foundation, Rob Gifford's organisation, to do a bit of investigation.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah. Can I say? I just back that up completely. Really, on the grounds of thinking about it in the same way we should now be thinking about pedestrian guard railing. It really does create that kind of racetrack mentality. Leaving aside the whole question of what actually happens when the vehicle hits it. And, you know, that kind of look that you get on railway bridges when they were put in, I think it was actually anti-terrorism legislation, and also quite expensive, I think.
We have in the past actually used anti-ram raid bollards in places where the incursion risk on the railway was so high that the risk of rapid deceleration of vehicle occupants and injuries was tolerable, because the consequence was worse. And actually, as a location I'm looking for another county council where the risk of going into a river, especially sort of late at night if you misjudge the road alignment, is much bigger than the risk of hitting a bollard at 30. And my late husband and I did dozens of anti-incursion works for Network Rail.
Brian? Oh, sorry, not Brian. Simon, presumably now. I concur with that, having been involved with the railways for a while on these sort of things, and installed some containment curbs. And yeah, it's very much sort of level of risk. Part of it may be looking at the way the road approaches as well. I think that's one thing we don't do enough deep investigation.
Yeah, for sure.
Just a quickie. Do we? That's a very nice chunk we've had on curbs. I don't know if Mark or anybody else wants to do something on bollards at some stage. I mean, you know, Richard Lewis, whatever. There's a big lot that can be said.
We do the Billy and Belinda bollards.
Whatever.
Half hour of presentation
cycling into bollards. That would be a start, wouldn't it?
Can I make a comment then on bollards and chains? We've got some fatalities there as well, particularly chains. People string chains across between bollards, and I noticed that in section 5 and in section 5 of the signs manual, road markings make a distinct alignment of the lines. You get a deflected white line to go around a traffic island to make sure that the motorists are aware that there's a traffic island there, but we have nothing in the way of standards for obstructions on cycle routes. The Dutch have done some stuff, and Ruth may recall this, is you get this big lead-in triangle at about 10 degrees in white paint that stops you ramming into a bollard. But we don't have that detailing on cycle routes.
I've done that quite a bit. I just don't worry about the regulations for that kind of thing. So nice long lines, giving people a bit of a lead in. Yeah.
We had a location where there was a bollard on a kind of off-road track by a river, and simultaneously the lighting failed and a cyclist went over at high speed and hit the unlit bollard, and said we should have provided an arrangement that worked in the absence of lighting, which I thought was a little bit harsh, given the lighting was only out for 1 day in 20 years.
I think possibly 1970s as well, which is what, when I was with Sustrans, we used to build I think it was a 15-degree splay on extension parapet rails on all the bridges.
Yep.
Because in the Peak District on the High Peak Trail, and a fairly novice cyclist on the cycle hire went down the incline. There were grips running across the track to catch the water, and she lost control on the grip, and the old railway bridge across the A6 has been replaced by a smaller cycle route bridge, and timber fencing had been put out along the line of the abutment, which is of course at 90 degrees to the path. The cyclist went straight through the timber parapet railings and down onto the A6 and died. Now that was probably 1970s, because very early cycle routes. But since then, I've always been aware that anything with an approach speed, you've got to look at sympathetic deflections rather than abrupt standards. And all the time, I think some of the Coventry illustrations of their cycle route are showing bus stop bypasses with 90-degree curbs taking the cyclist around. And I'm quite disturbed about seeing that sort of thing.